The quiet hum of a suburban neighborhood, peaceful, almost serene. Yet, beneath this calm, a storm is brewing. Michael stands in his driveway, keys in hand, ready to walk inside his home. It's a simple moment, one that should be filled with safety, with warmth. But tonight, it isn't. The flash of red and blue lights pierces the darkness, and a police car pulls up without warning. No sirens. No reason given. Just a simple, heavy request. Step out of the car. Michael's heart races. He hasn't broken the law, yet here he is, suddenly a suspect. His only crime? The color of his skin. Is this what safety feels like in America? Or is it something only for some, never for others? Michael stood frozen, the bright lights of the police car now blinding him, but he couldn't move. This was the first time in his life he felt trapped in his own neighborhood. What's going on? Why are you stopping me? His voice was shaky, his hands slightly trembling as he reached for his ID. But the officer didn't answer immediately, just stared at him, the air thick with unspoken judgment. You fit the description, the officer finally said, his voice cold, dismissive. Michael was taken aback. The description of what? I haven't done anything wrong. But the officer didn't respond. The more Michael tried to explain, the more it felt like he was speaking into a void. His heart pounded as the officer's silence spoke louder than words ever could. He was guilty, simply for being a black man in a mostly white neighborhood. Back at home, his mother, Linda, watched from the window. She had seen this happen countless times before. Michael, don't argue with them. Just stay calm, she called out from the door, her voice tinged with fear. Michael could feel her worry in his bones, but the feeling of injustice ran deeper. It's not right, Mom, he muttered under his breath, realizing the painful truth. He wasn't safe. Not even at home. Michael sat stiffly in the back of the police car, his mind reeling. The flashing lights outside seemed to blur as he tried to grasp the reality of the situation. Why was he being treated like this? What had he done wrong? He hadn't committed a crime, yet here he was, bound by handcuffs, his heart pounding in his chest. The officer had never explained why they'd stopped him. The only answer had been a cold, dismissive glance as they forced him into the back of the car. As the car rolled toward the precinct, Michael felt his stomach twist in knots. He wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the fear held him back. What would happen if he spoke up? Would they take it as defiance? Or worse, escalate it? His palms sweated against the metal of the cuffs. He could feel the tension in his body, the helplessness creeping in. At the station, the officers were indifferent. They shoved him into a holding room and left him there without a word. The cold concrete walls closed in on him, and the fluorescent lights above hummed incessantly, adding to the suffocating atmosphere. Was this how it felt to be invisible? Michael wondered. They didn't even look at him as a person. To them, he was just another suspect. Minutes passed like hours before a tall officer entered the room. He wore a uniform that felt like a weight on Michael's chest, a reminder that the power in this situation was not his own. The officer's eyes lingered over Michael, a smirk forming on his lips. You think you're special, huh? The officer sneered. I didn't do anything, Michael said quietly, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard. Why am I here? His words were edged with frustration, but he kept his calm. The last thing he needed was to show them any weakness. The officer leaned in closer, as if savoring the moment. You fit the description, he said nonchalantly. You're suspicious, and we can detain you for as long as we want. Michael's eyes widened. Suspicious? His pulse quickened, and for a moment his mind went blank. He hadn't been doing anything unusual. His only crime was the color of his skin. The officer's eyes flicked over him again, like a predator sizing up its prey. Michael wanted to scream, to demand that they listen to him. But something inside him stopped him. He knew better than to escalate things. Suspicious? Because I'm black? Michael muttered under his breath. The words felt like a punch to the gut, but they were the truth. This wasn't about his actions. This was about his skin. It was always about his skin. The officer's expression darkened as he leaned in closer. You better watch your tone, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Michael took a deep breath. His heart was still racing, but now something shifted inside him. His fear was still there, but it wasn't paralyzing him. He had to stay calm. He had to remember his mother's voice. Stay calm, Michael. Don't give them a reason. But the truth was clear now. No matter how calm he stayed, no matter how innocent he was, it didn't matter. They saw him as guilty from the moment he walked into that street. The system, the officers, all of them, they had already made up their minds. The officer left the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The silence was deafening, and the injustice felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. This wasn't just about one officer, one stop. It was about a system that had been built to treat him like he was less than human. This isn't over, Michael thought, clenching his fists. He wasn't going to let it define him, but he knew he couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. The hours dragged on, each passing second feeling like a weight pressing down on Michael's chest. The cold, sterile walls of the holding room seemed to close in around him. He had been alone for what felt like an eternity, no one saying a word, no explanation given. He was tired of the uncertainty, tired of the injustice, and above all, tired of feeling invisible. His thoughts spiraled in his mind, his heart pounding as he replayed every moment from the time he was stopped until now. Why was this happening? His phone had been taken from him, and the only connection to the outside world was the echo of his own thoughts. His mother's voice lingered in his mind, telling him to stay calm, to stay strong. But how could he remain calm when his very identity was being questioned? The anger began to simmer under the surface, building with each minute that ticked by. Finally, the door to the holding room swung open. The tall officer from earlier stepped in again, his eyes narrowing as he looked Michael up and down, as if examining him for something Michael couldn't see. Michael had been through this before, and he wasn't going to back down now. The tension between them was palpable. Well, still here, huh? The officer sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. You're lucky we even gave you a holding cell. Some of your kind don't get that luxury. Michael's fists clenched involuntarily. The officer's words cut deep, but he bit back the urge to lash out. He had to be smart. If he reacted, it would only make things worse. What are you trying to say? Michael's voice came out low, steady, though he could feel the heat rising in his chest. That I don't deserve to be here? That I'm somehow less than? The officer leaned in closer, invading his space. You're lucky you're even still talking to me. People like you don't get the same treatment. But here you are, thinking you're some kind of exception. Michael's stomach twisted. He had heard these words before, from people who didn't care to understand his reality. He was supposed to be grateful, supposed to stay silent. But tonight, something inside him was breaking free. His thoughts flashed to his mother, her voice soft, yet filled with warning. Stay calm, Michael. Don't give them a reason to hurt you. But this was more than just surviving. This was about standing up, about letting them know he wouldn't just accept the way things were. I'm not some exception, Michael said, his voice finally rising. I'm a person. I'm a human being. And I deserve to be treated with respect, just like anyone else. The color of my skin doesn't change that. The officer's eyes flickered, something dark and calculating passing through them. He took a step back, clearly unprepared for the defiance he had just witnessed. Michael's pulse was racing, but he held his ground. He wasn't about to let this man, or anyone else, define who he was based on prejudice. You think you're entitled to something better, huh? The officer's tone had changed, a touch of aggression now in his voice. You think just because you're educated, because you've got a good job, you're somehow better than the rest of them? Than the rest of us? Michael's heart hammered in his chest, but he took another deep breath, steadying himself. No, I don't think I'm better. I think I deserve better. We all do. The officer paused, and for a brief moment, Michael thought he might actually back off. But instead, the officer turned away, his words laced with a bitter laugh. You're just like the rest. Nothing special. With that, he left the room, slamming the door behind him. Michael stood there, his legs shaking, his heart still racing. The anger and fear were mingling, but now, there was something else too, something stronger. Defiance. His mind raced, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to stay silent anymore. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't even about the officer or this night. It was about something bigger, something that had been growing for years in the hearts of those who had suffered, who had been held down. And tonight, Michael realized, it was his turn to stand up. The door opened again. This time, it was a familiar face, one of his friends from the neighborhood, someone who had seen Michael grow up, who had known the struggles of the community. He had heard about what happened and had come to see Michael. Are you okay? His friend asked softly, his eyes scanning Michael's face. Michael met his gaze, and for the first time that night, he felt a sense of solidarity, a reminder that he wasn't alone. I will be, Michael said, his voice steady despite everything. But we're going to need more than just prayers. We're going to need action. His friend nodded. They both knew this was far from over. The fight for justice had only just begun. Michael sat on the hard bench in the holding cell, the dim light above flickering intermittently. It had been hours, maybe even longer, since he'd been detained. His mind kept replaying the same question over and over. Why? Why was he here? What had he done to deserve this? His thoughts felt like they were spiraling, each one more painful than the last. The anger inside him was starting to fade, replaced by something even more consuming: confusion. The confusion of being treated as less, of having to prove his humanity when it should have been obvious. The door creaked open again. Michael looked up, expecting it to be another officer, perhaps the same one from earlier, but it was someone else. A man in a suit, his face familiar, though Michael couldn't place him immediately. The man stepped into the room with a clipboard, his eyes quickly scanning Michael. He wasn't wearing a police uniform, but there was something authoritative in his posture. "Michael, I'm your lawyer. We're going to get you out of here," the man said, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. Michael nodded, still in shock. "You think they'll just let me go?" His voice was quiet, but the pain was clear in his words. "What did I do wrong? All I did was be in the wrong place at the wrong time." The lawyer looked at him with a pitying expression. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're a victim of a system that treats you differently just because of the color of your skin." The words hit Michael like a ton of bricks. His breath caught in his chest as the full weight of what was happening settled over him. He wasn't just being detained because of a mistake. This wasn't some accident. This wasn't just about him, or even about the officer who had stopped him. This was something much bigger, something that had been happening for decades, centuries even. It was the system itself that had failed him. It had failed every person who looked like him, who had ever been treated as though their lives didn't matter. "It's not about what I've done," Michael said, his voice shaking. "It's about what I am." The lawyer nodded, his expression somber. "Exactly. It's about who you are and how you're seen by this system. This system was never designed to protect people like you, Michael. It's designed to keep you in your place." The words were like a revelation to Michael. Everything suddenly clicked. He hadn't been caught up in some unfortunate mistake or misunderstanding. He hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been in the wrong place at the right time, and that was the problem. His existence, his mere presence, was enough to label him suspicious, to put him at risk. Michael stood up, his legs unsteady at first. The room seemed to spin around him as he processed the truth that had been hidden for so long. He wasn't just some individual, caught in a system that occasionally made mistakes. He was part of a larger pattern, part of a long history of injustice. His mind flashed back to his mother's warnings, her steady voice telling him how the world would see him. He had always known it, on some level, but hearing it so plainly made it all the more real, all the more painful. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit in," Michael murmured, more to himself than to the lawyer. "Trying to be the good son, the good man. But nothing I do ever seems to matter." "It's not you, Michael," the lawyer replied gently. "It's the world you're living in. But that doesn't mean you're powerless." Michael took a deep breath. The weight of everything, the anger, the confusion, the helplessness, seemed to lighten just a little. His mother's voice, too, echoed in his mind. "Stay calm, Michael. But always know your worth." It had always been about staying calm, staying out of trouble, but now something else clicked. This wasn't just about staying out of trouble. It was about recognizing the worth that had been denied him for so long. His worth, his humanity, wasn't something that could be taken away just because of the color of his skin. The lawyer handed Michael a piece of paper, a release form. "We're getting you out of here," he said again. But this time, Michael didn't just see the piece of paper as an escape from the immediate situation. He saw it as something more, a symbol of his own agency, of the power he had to take control of his own life, no matter what the system tried to do to him. "I'm not going to be silent anymore," Michael whispered to himself, a new resolve settling over him. "I'm not going to let them decide who I am." The door swung open once again, and this time, Michael wasn't just waiting to be let out of the room. He was ready to step out into the world and fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, unseen, and less than they were. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Michael sat alone in the quiet room, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The words from his lawyer had been powerful, yet it was still hard for him to process the full extent of what had just happened. He was free, at least physically, but the emotional burden was still there. The injustice of the situation, the system that had been set up to hold him down, was a truth he couldn't ignore anymore. The realization had come crashing down on him like a wave, leaving him gasping for air. "They can't keep getting away with this," he muttered to himself, the words barely audible, but they were powerful nonetheless. He'd been silent for too long, but now he could feel the surge of anger and helplessness turn into something else, something stronger. It was as if a fire had been lit within him, a fire that refused to burn out. He couldn't just walk away from this. He couldn't let it go. Not when he knew there were so many others like him. So many others who had been treated the same way, year after year, without anyone speaking up. Michael stood up, the cold floor beneath his feet a stark contrast to the heat building inside him. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had to do something. The old Michael, fearful, quiet, obedient, was gone. In his place stood someone who was determined to make his voice heard, someone who could no longer be silenced. The door opened and Michael's mother, Linda, walked in. Her face was creased with worry, but she smiled when she saw him standing, fully clothed and looking like he was about to head out the door. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Michael, what's going on? Are you all right?" Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of fear beneath the surface. She had always told him to stay safe, to stay out of trouble, but now she could sense the change in him. "I'm not all right, Mom," Michael replied, his voice firm. "But I'm going to do something about it." Linda's brow furrowed. She had seen this look in her son before. The look of determination, the look that meant he was about to do something that would change everything. "What are you talking about?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "I'm not going to stay quiet anymore. I've been silent for too long. I'm going to fight back, Mom. For me. For everyone." Linda shook her head, the weight of the moment settling in. "Michael, I know you want to make a difference. But this world, it's not as simple as standing up to them. You could be putting yourself in even more danger." Michael's expression softened, but there was a fire in his eyes. "I know the risks. I know how dangerous this is. But what's the alternative, Mom? Let them keep walking all over us? Let them keep doing this to people who look like me? I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of seeing people who look like me get beaten down while no one says a word." Linda was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching her son's face. She had raised him to be kind, to be patient, to avoid conflict. But as she looked at him now, standing tall and strong in front of her, she realized that the world had changed him. Michael had always been her baby, but now he was a man. A man who was ready to fight for his dignity. "I can't stop you," Linda said softly, her voice trembling. "But please be careful. You're all I have." Michael reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I will, Mom. I promise. But I can't stay silent anymore. It's time we all started standing up." With that, Michael turned and walked toward the door, a newfound sense of purpose filling his every step. His mother watched him leave, a mix of pride and fear washing over her. She had always told him to play it safe, to avoid conflict. But Michael had found something greater than safety. He had found his voice. Outside, the world felt different to Michael. He had always been afraid of what might happen if he spoke out, afraid of the consequences of standing up to those in power. But now, that fear had been replaced with resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for all the people who had been silenced, for the generations before him who had been forced to endure the same injustice without a voice. As Michael walked into the streets, he saw the faces of his neighbors, his community, walking by, each of them carrying their own burdens, their own fears. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. He didn't feel like just another person caught in the system. He felt like a part of something bigger, something that was going to change. It was time to rise up, to make his voice heard. The city was buzzing with anticipation. Michael stood on the steps of the courthouse, a crowd gathering behind him. His heart was pounding, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. This wasn't just another legal case. This was a battle for something much bigger, his dignity, his right to be treated as a human being. It was about all the people who had been silenced for too long, those who had suffered under the same oppressive system that had once held him captive. As Michael gazed at the crowd, he saw faces he recognized, people who had stood by him since the day he was detained. They had joined him in the fight, and today they would be there, standing with him, as a reminder that unity was the key to breaking down the barriers that had divided them for so long. The case had been a long and painful process. There were moments when Michael had almost given up, moments when the weight of the fight seemed too much to bear. But through it all, he had kept going, driven by the support of those around him. He wasn't in this fight alone anymore. The crowd cheered as Michael stepped up to the podium, a microphone in front of him. His voice cracked slightly, but he took a deep breath and steadied himself. "Thank you all for being here today. This fight wasn't just mine. It was all of ours. It's for every person who's been treated as less than, every person who's ever felt powerless. Today we stand together, and we are telling the world that we will not be silent anymore." His words echoed through the crowd, a sense of empowerment filling the air. Michael paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the faces of those who had supported him, those who had joined the fight for justice. His mother, Linda, stood near the front, her face a mix of pride and relief. She had feared for him, but now she saw the strength in her son that she had never truly understood until now. We've been told to stay quiet, to accept what's been handed to us. But we can't accept that anymore. We are not criminals. We are human beings, deserving of the same rights, the same respect as anyone else, Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. The time for change is now. We are not just fighting for ourselves, but for our children, for our grandchildren, and for every generation that will come after us. We will be heard. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound of their unity filling the air. Michael felt a surge of emotion rise within him. This wasn't just about winning a case. This was about creating a future where people like him, people who had been marginalized and oppressed, would finally have a chance at a fair and just life. Behind him, the courthouse doors swung open, and the judge stepped out, followed by the prosecutor and the defense attorney. The moment of truth had come. Michael could feel the eyes of everyone in the crowd, their hopes and dreams resting on the outcome of this case. His hands shook slightly, but his resolve was unwavering. He had come too far to back down now. The judge cleared his throat, his voice carrying through the silence. After careful consideration, the court has decided to drop all charges against Mr. Michael Evans. The evidence presented does not support the accusations made against him, and we recognize that this case was a miscarriage of justice. A collective gasp went through the crowd, and then the applause began. It was loud, overwhelming, as if the weight of years of oppression had finally been lifted. Michael stood frozen for a moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. He had won. But more than that, the fight for justice had won. The fight for equality had won. Linda's eyes filled with tears as she rushed forward to embrace her son. "I knew you could do it. I knew you were strong enough," she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael held her tightly, the emotions of the moment threatening to overwhelm him. "It's not over, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is just the beginning. There's still so much work to be done. But today we made a difference. Today, we showed them that we won't be pushed down anymore." The crowd continued to cheer, their voices a chorus of hope and change. Michael knew this victory wasn't just his own. It was a victory for every person who had ever been silenced. And though the road ahead would be long, he knew one thing for sure: they were no longer invisible. They had been seen, and they would never again be overlooked. The streets felt different to Michael as he walked home that evening. The same streets he'd walked countless times before now felt charged with something new. There was a sense of weightlessness to his steps, but at the same time, a profound understanding of the road ahead. The victory in the courtroom was a momentary triumph, but what came after, that would be the real test. His thoughts drifted to the case, to the courtroom filled with the sound of applause when the judge delivered the verdict. It had been overwhelming, the relief washing over him like a tidal wave. But now, as the sun began to set, it was the silence that held more meaning. The long road he'd walked, and the road ahead, seemed even longer now. His heart still carried the scars of everything he had endured, but it also held the spark of something else: hope. Michael walked slowly, the sound of his footsteps echoing against the pavement, a rhythmic reminder of the burden he had been carrying for so long. He was free now, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't be content with winning a case. This was about something deeper, something more fundamental. When he reached his front door, he paused for a moment, staring at the house that had once been his safe haven. Inside, Linda was waiting for him, as always, with her warm smile. But today, her smile held something else: relief, yes, but also a kind of quiet pride. She had seen the man her son had become, and though she had always hoped for this day, she hadn't fully realized the weight of his transformation until now. "How do you feel?" Linda asked gently as Michael stepped inside, her voice filled with concern but also warmth. Michael looked at her for a moment, searching for the right words. "I feel different, but not in the way I thought I would. I feel like I'm finally seeing the world for what it is, not just for what I was told it should be." He walked over to the kitchen counter and set down his keys. "I used to think that if I just stayed quiet, if I followed the rules, it would all work out. But today I realized those rules weren't meant to protect people like me. They were meant to silence us." His voice shook slightly, but there was a steadiness in his tone now that hadn't been there before. Linda sat at the kitchen table, watching her son. "I've always told you to be careful, Michael. To stay out of trouble, to avoid standing out. But now, I see that you found something much more important than safety. Michael nodded. I thought staying quiet would keep me safe. But it didn't. I've seen it now. All the years I spent being careful, trying not to cause trouble, it didn't stop the system from treating me like a criminal. Linda's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. And now I can't just sit back anymore. Not when I know the truth. Not when I know that my voice can make a difference. There was a long silence as they both sat together, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Michael had learned something crucial today, something his mother had tried to teach him for years, though she hadn't known how to say it. It wasn't enough to survive in this world. It wasn't enough to stay out of trouble. Sometimes you had to fight back. Sometimes you had to make yourself heard. As he looked at his mother, Michael understood. This wasn't just his victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt silenced, for everyone who had ever been treated as less than human. The system might have been built to hold them down, but they had found a way to rise above it. We've started something today, Michael said, his voice steady with a newfound confidence. But there's so much more to do. We've opened the door, but now we have to walk through it. Together. Linda squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'll walk with you every step of the way. As they sat together, in the quiet of their home, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A deep, profound sense of peace. He knew the road ahead would still be difficult. He knew the fight for justice wouldn't be easy, and there would be many battles still to come. But for the first time, he felt ready. Ready to face the world, ready to keep pushing forward, and most importantly, ready to stand up for what was right. Outside, the world continued on, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in that small home. But Michael knew that change was coming, and this time, it would be impossible to ignore. The story of Michael's journey from fear to action holds a profound lesson for us all, especially in a world where injustice still lurks in the shadows. Throughout the ordeal, Michael learned that silence does not protect you. For years, he believed that staying quiet and avoiding trouble would keep him safe. But when he was unjustly detained and faced the brutal reality of a system that had no intention of protecting him, he realized the truth. Silence only enables the cycle of oppression. It wasn't until Michael chose to stand up, to speak out, that he began to take back his power. The lesson here is simple, yet powerful. We cannot wait for justice to come to us. We must fight for it. Michael's story teaches us that the systems of inequality will never change on their own. They must be challenged, just as Michael challenged the very system that tried to keep him quiet. It wasn't enough to stay out of trouble. He had to make his voice heard for himself and for all those who had been silenced. This lesson extends beyond the world of law and justice. It applies to every facet of life. Whether it's speaking out against unfairness, standing up for what's right, or simply refusing to accept things as they are, we all have the power to create change. Michael, by facing his fear and taking action, taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite it. So for anyone who has felt silenced or powerless, remember Michael's story. Your voice matters. Don't wait for justice to come to you. Fight for it, just as Michael did. In Michael's journey, we see how silence can perpetuate injustice, and how taking a stand, even in the face of fear, can lead to powerful change. What moments in your life have made you realize the importance of speaking out, even when it's hard? How can we all become more active in challenging the systems around us to create a more just world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's spark a conversation and inspire each other to take action.